So here we are on Tuesday, May 5th, still in my thinking involved with the coronavirus game. So I'm doing these live streams for homeschoolers. My name is Dr. Fred Ray Lybrand. We homeschool our kids from birth to college, all five of them, and they're off in life, having babies and fully employed and doing really quite well. We, however, are continuing to try to pitch in and help folks along with things we learned over the years, mistakes we made, some of the good things we did, and see if you find any of this helpful. What we are working on today is really the title of this is about wisdom. It's about really homeschool fails. Let me put that up there if I can. So homeschool fails. So do you ever watch fails on the internet? So this is called rules over wisdom. And this homeschool fail, rules over wisdom, is kind of strategic and underappreciated, I think, by most people. So if you want your homeschool to fail, here's the point. Have more rules. Make sure you just have zillions of rules for everything. The more rules, the better. If you'll get enough rules in there, you can get your homeschool to completely fall apart, as well as your life and your friendship. So I'm going to explain why I take this approach and see if you find this helpful at all. So in these fails, what you're seeing is people, skateboards and going down banisters and falling, or people standing on tables they shouldn't stand on, and people trying to jump a creek or something, and they don't really jump far enough, and so as a result, they land in the water, they're walking across a log, and the log breaks, all these things. Excuse me, and we all laugh at them because, I don't know, we're glad it's us, nervous, surprised, some macabre sense of humor. It's quite unclear. The truth is that you could have a rule, like the rule would be, don't skateboard, right? But the truth is that's not what you need. You need a principle. They need to, like I was telling Jody, I said, non-athletic people should not try athletic things. So it'd be a principle. People who are not balanced should not do balancing things, especially on camera. That'd be more of a principle. So years ago, when I was at a summer camp in Boy Scouts, my scoutmaster, we called him Old Gray. I don't know how old he was, but he was gray, and we loved him dearly. I remember I stayed up for a provisional camp, so I was gone from my family and from everyone for an extra week or two. And he wrote me a letter. And in that letter, I remember two distinct things. There were several, but he gave me a couple of pieces of wisdom. And the first one was, you only get one chance to make a first good impression. The second one, he said, there are two times to keep your mouth shut. When you're angry and when you're swimming. I don't know what all the letter was about, but I did notice early on, I began to have a bit of a love affair with quotations, maxims, aphorisms, heuristics, whatever you want to call these things. I used to get Reader's Digest. My favorite thing was something called quotable quotes. And I found out in time, because I'm very oriented to being lazy, that what I like most about quotes is it's like an entire book in a sentence, and I could make use of it. If I could learn principles that are useful to me, I can use them a little of everywhere. So that's what I want to talk about in this context of rules over wisdom. Now, if something pops in your head and you want to ask a question or make a comment, use that chat box. It'll get back to me. We're on a variety of platforms right now, so it's going through a software process. But as we talk about this idea of rules over wisdom, I just want to evaluate rules first and then wisdom, so we can kind of appreciate what we're talking about. So rules. So a rule, and I found this with my kids. I might state something in passing, and it would turn into a rule. And the kids all had this. No, we had a rule. You couldn't blah, 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 blah. And that's not what we're aiming for, but your kids are in a plot to find the rules. And I think they want to find the rules for something I'm going to share in just a moment. But they're wanting to know where's safety, where's not safety. And that's what rules do for us. They do give us a sense of safety or not safety. So go through what rules are about. Okay, first of all, a rule is limited. A rule is something you lay down, and it's limited for a period of time or a situation or a context, or I'm going to talk about all those. But it doesn't have much application beyond the issue that it's on. So you see government regulations all the time, so there are rules. If you live in a certain part of the world or a certain height, have a certain color hair, you've got to fill out this form in this order and do it, standing on your left foot while whistling, some kind of patriotic song. I'm making up something, but it's about how it feels when bureaucracies get involved. And it's because of the limited nature of it. It's a very focused, limited thing, the nature of a rule. The second thing to consider is that rules also are situational. So rules are invented and developed to deal with a certain situation. So because of the situation, here's the rule. And it's designed to make sure something happens in a certain way. There's just an out-and-out rule to the game. The third thing to note is that rules tend to be inflexible. This is how you do it. There are no options. There are no alternatives. It is to be done in this way. It's a rule orientation, and it is not flexible. The last two things are why I think there's a challenge with rules, and I'm going to back up and show you when it's good. But rules tend to be able to be manipulated or hacked. So once somebody knows the rule, then they can do a workaround, some kind of hack, sidestep it, an exception. I think what they like to call it in the legal world is a loophole, right? So that's what a rule actually does. So they can miss the point of the principle, but instead have this rule. And so you in your homeschool, if you're sitting there with kids that are struggling and frustrated a little bit, you might want to look at this rule stuff. And I'm going to show you how to look at principles in just a moment. But the final thing that rules do that I want to mention is that they tend to kick back. So there's something in human beings when you tell them, do not open the door. There's something in us that just wants to open it a little wider, right? Maybe before we close it. Human development shows that people are great at following rules at about 5 years old, 4 to 5, for a little while within that year, maybe 9 months. And those people, for a moment, just want to try to see what happens if we do all the rules. And so then they know. A good 18-month-old or 2-year-old knows instinctively already to say, no, I don't want that. No, not that rule. No, 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 right? So that's kind of the game that we're caught in. I remember just trying to think of a couple of examples. This one's a little macabre, so you have to forgive me, but it just sticks out in my mind. My brother was learning to drive, and we were one Thanksgiving, I think it was, driving up to our relative's house nearby, about 45 minutes in Alabama. We're going to go hunt or something like that. And so we are driving, and my brother is like 15. He has a learner's permit. My sister and I are in the back seat playing chess or some game, or checkers probably. Mom and Dad are in the front. Dad's on one side, Mom's in the middle. My brother's driving. And suddenly we're all going along, and suddenly the car goes, boom! It just lurched. We ran over something, and the checkers spilled or whatever it was. And my dad said to my brother, he said, son, did you see that dog? And my brother said, it's okay, Dad. He was already dead. So if you get this picture, and we're in Alabama too, this dog had died, but my brother has in his mind a rule. stay in the road, stay in the lane, stay in the lane, stay in the lane, stay in the road, stay in the lane, right? And so he doesn't avoid it. He just knows he's not hurting the dog. Well, that's where the problem is, because then if you generate another rule that says, okay, dodge dogs that are dead in the road, well, then that's got to be situational. What about a rooster? What about something else? What about a tire? And instead of teaching someone principles about driving, about avoidance and injury and how it works, they can be so rule-oriented that they forget or miss the game. So when you understand this nature of rules, it can help dramatically, because in life, you want to replace rules, in my opinion, with wisdom. I'm going to get to that in just a sec. I'm going to give one example where a rule was good. So one day, Brooks, our youngest, went out into our alley with Miss Scarlett, our Doberman, and walked down about 2 houses over. There's a 6-lane road called Midkiff in Midland, Alabama, and so Midland, Texas, excuse me. And so on Midkiff, massive traffic, and somebody found Brooks, saw him with Scarlett right at the edge of that traffic, like going to walk out into it or not or whatever. So we got him back and showed him he had opened the gate and walked out. And so I went out there every morning and told him, that's a no. Do not touch that gate. Rule. Do not touch that gate. You cannot touch that lock. Do not touch that lock. We did it that night. Next morning, that seemed to get it in the system. Years later, he was, a little guy, 3 or so then, but like 5 or 6 or something. Mom wants him to take something out into the alley to the trash bin or something like that. And he looks at her and says, oh, I can touch the gate? It was like a shock to him, because he had that rule drummed in his head. So there are times that rules are great. They greatly protect us. But they're not exactly a wisdom path. And here's why. Rules in particular, principles in contrast to rules are what you're really looking for. So principles, rather than being limited like a rule, are limitless. They can actually be applied in a lot of different contexts. In fact, we go a little further and point out that they are, instead of being situational, they tend to be generic. So a principle about how you handle your money can be applied in a lot of situations with money, as opposed to a rule that just says one particular thing. I'll give you an example from the Bible. I know this one. So a rule, people would say 10%, tithe, giving, 10%. That's part of it, but it was a governmental structure in the Old Testament. It was part of the taxing structure, and you add them all up, and it may have gone up more like 20, 22%. New Testament will talk about God loves a cheerful giver. So the principle is more like, where do you find cheerfulness and joy in your giving? It's a principle, as opposed to a rule. You got to give 10% to the king, the temple, the system, whatever it is. Third, principles are really about learning and growing. So they're really caught up in a world of, they apply in a broad way, and it's about learning and growing. So it's a principle orientation. So if you misapply the principle, you learn from it and you can improve it, or you can improve in your homeschool. How do we adjust what we're trying to do in principle to work better? Finally, I would also point out that this wisdom path, this principle path, is fundamentally a flexible game. So it'll develop and operate as your kids grow. And this is really the nature of wisdom, because you're trying to prepare your kids to become adults that are happy, that function well. And rules can have a tendency to lock people in. So I remember a couple I was counseling some years ago. I remember meeting with them. I may have shared this before, but as we were talking, I realized they're having real problems with their teenage daughter. And I looked at them, and as we talked it through, I finally realized, I said, you guys are some of the greatest parents in the world for 11-year-olds. And I really meant this. And I showed them, their story fit it. You're awesome for 11 years old, but she's 16. And so rules you've created that you're keeping her under like she's still 11 aren't going to work. It's not going to be a good strategy at all, because that's not the path of wisdom. Wisdom is something you instill in your kids where they're not trying to live out a bunch of rules, but rather they're trying to apply wisdom and principles. So wisdom is just about the results of life choices. So when you get wise, you can start seeing, if I do this, it leads to that, like dominoes. So you can see the direction of something happening. You're not living under a rule, but a principle that says, I see where this is going. So let me throw out a few that you might find, I hope, helpful as you think about this. So here's one. Some people, in the Eastern world, they might call this karma. Others would say what goes around comes around. The more common phrase is you reap as you sow. So you reap as you sow. That's a principle. That's not a rule. It's a principle. And so if you think about you reap as you sow, you can apply it to a lot of areas. If you want friends, and you think of reap as you sow means the kind of seed you put out there, you'll get that seed back. So if you plant corn, you get corn back. It doesn't happen in the same season. You get more back than you sow. So you sow a little and get a lot. So if you want friends and you're applying the principle, not a rule, the rules would be say hi, be nice, give them a present so they'll feel obligated, or some strategy somebody has. I think they do these kind of weird things with dating. That is a rule orientation. Principle wisdom would be, hey, you reap as you sow. If you want more friends, be friendly. So the more you sow to friendship, the more friends you'll get. Doesn't guarantee everybody will be a friend, but in principle, that's how it goes. And you can apply that in all kinds of concept texts. You can teach your kids to be friendly at work, be friendly among themselves, be friendly with adults, or respectful. It just depends on what you want. You reap as you sow. If you want to become good at math, you have to do more math, right? If you want to be good at reading, you got to get them to read more, because you'll reap as you sow. If you let them determine their own schedule and do things at their own pace all the time, you're going to reap a harvest of them not knowing how to be disciplined, because they'll just do things when they feel like it. And that's going to be, I'm going to predict, a problem for them, because someday they're going to work for a boss or be in college or school or some context where government, the boss, or administrators are telling them what to do, and they go, no. And so everything's about a no. So that would be a reap as you sow in that negative direction, but that's a good thing to know. The more you sow to debt, the more debt you're going to get. The more you sow to increasing your value, the more money you can get. See how that works? Here's another one. What gets rewarded gets done. That's a principle. And so in parenting, you can look at behavior and go, hey, I see a behavior happening here, and this is not the behavior I want. But because of this principle, what gets rewarded gets done. I must be encouraging my child to behave this way. So I remember one of my favorite examples was a mom who was sitting there visiting our house. The husband was coming later, and I was sitting there hanging out. Everybody's in the kitchen, and she was feeding her baby. And she would stick the, pureed peas or whatever in the baby's mouth. Baby would eat. And then she'd turn and talk to me. And da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And the baby would go, eh. And then she'd keep talking, and the baby would go, eh. And she'd keep talking, the baby would go, eh. And she'd go, oh. And she'd stick it back in, the baby ate a little bit. And she did this about 3 or 4 times, and I kind of looked at her like that. And she said, Fred, I just don't know what's going on. But this child screams through every meal. Well, what gets rewarded gets done. You have a principle, and you can start discerning what's going on. We like to just ask the question, how did I teach you to do that? What's going on that's rewarding this behavior? Whether it's rebellion or laziness or indiligence or conflict or whatever. Because what gets rewarded gets done. Something's up. One principle I wrote down to mention was get better, not perfect. So rules tend to have black and white perfection to them. Improvement, constant improvement is a different type of game. If you'd start measuring your child's math scores and just see what percentage they get correct and start charting it and did nothing more, just nothing more, just chart it, just that measurement is going to take you in a better direction. Because what you want to do, let's say they get 70% right. What you really would want to do is to help them get to 72% right consistently, or to 75, and to constantly improve. Now, there are other ways to do that, and certain standards slowing down, and we talk about that in some of our material, but I'm just saying, if you're new at homeschooling or have this kind of problem, if you think in principle the idea is to get better, not perfect, giving that to your child, all we want you to do is to improve. It's not about you being in trouble, about flunking, about meeting some exact standard. It's where are you now and how can we get you further along? That's a principle orientation. Throw out 3 more real quick. You want to treat your children the same by treating each one differently. So you respect the differences and you want to be fair and appropriate, but sameness is not quite the game. It's just, it's for this person, their talents, this person, their talents. You might enable them with different things. Some you may encourage them a little more in sports, and others you may encourage more in the arts or something like that. But you're paying attention inside the game of what's going on. So you want to treat them all the same by treating each one differently, really respecting the uniqueness of the individual. You'll find that true if people work for you. You're going to treat your employees the same by treating them differently because you're going to understand what they're up to. Maybe you have rules, maybe you have whatever, but you can learn in principle to be wiser in how you interact and deal with folks. Another principle is more age, more responsibility, or more privilege. This kind of goes with treat them the same by treating each differently, but as the kids age, you really want to get off of the rules and onto more principles. But as they age, there's more privilege and responsibility. They're more capable and they can do more harm too, so they're more responsible because they can control themselves. So one of the things we would do is the kids actually had different bedtimes depending on different ages. So we were kind of building into the system what gets rewarded gets done, that growing up is a thing we like here. We're not trying to, it's not Toys R Us parenting. We're not trying to keep you a kid. I don't want to grow up. We're definitely not that world. We're wanting age to have privilege. And even in our context, we concluded their senior year when they turned 18, I think we did it, they had no curfew from then on, because we wanted them to not have a curfew at home and see how they handled it, rather than going off to college or wherever they went in life and going crazy, if we had overprotected them. That worked out well. We just wanted to tell them to let us know where they were, but they had no curfew. And I think they all tried it once or twice and went, phew, that wasn't fun. So I don't think they ever cared about it because there's no kickback. There's no rule. You have to be in by 11. You have to be in by 10. And the more you create those rules, the more of a problem it is. There can be things like Instagram. No Instagram. Okay, well, that's your family. Figure it out. But if you do Instagram instead of a rule, do it in principle. What are they up to with it? Why are they doing it? What are the things they're looking at? Be principle oriented. Finally, I just want to mention communication. In communication, one of the things I would encourage you in principle to practice is first understand, then disagree. Just in principle, you want to make sure somehow or another you understand what the other person's talking about. And then you can talk about what you disagree. In my experience, people commonly are disagreeing about things they haven't even sorted out between themselves, the kids especially. And so if you can instill the principle of trying to say, you're wanting to get an understanding so you can actually know what specifically you disagree with. You're not wanting to start out there, and you don't want to turn this into a rule, but it's a matter of life choices and wisdom and how this game goes. So those are my thoughts about this. I said home fail. That's a hoot. It should have said, I did that wrong. I should have said homeschool. Homeschool fail. So we'll just lay that up there for kicks. If you have any questions, shoot them up real quick. I'll be glad to give a shot at it. But just to re-stress the point, it's If you want to fail, just keep rules over wisdom. If you want to succeed, I'm going to argue that you want to keep finding bits of wisdom and operating principle inside the family, and keep moving in a direction of less rules on the older ones and more principles about what they want to do in life, what kind of friends they want to have, what kind of life they want to build. But it's going to be built, especially, I'm going to tell you, around the you'll reap as you sow. If you don't study, you're not going to go in that direction. If you don't learn mechanical skills, how are you going to be any good at mechanical stuff? If you never save money, how are you going to have money for emergencies? That's the idea. It's a path of wisdom, not of rules. Anyway, I hope that helped. We'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, as long as this COVID thing keeps being a distraction. Bless you.